It is that time. We're one episode away. After this episode, be the final. It is the Panthers versus the Lynx in the 36th Ball Bowl. So right now on Sports Hour. It is that time. The Panthers and the Lynx are going to play in the 36th NBL Ball Bowl. So what's a little difficult for me is the Panthers have been to the Ball Bowl so much, and I don't even know to say if it's even going to be much of a challenge for the Lynx and the Panthers to even have a chance of even battling it out. This is going to be a very interesting season. It's been a very interesting season, and we're going to go to a second here. They're making it difficult for me. Yes, but this is going to be a very, very tough season for this. Looking at the games that they have had, what they had to do to actually face off to get here, Panthers did pretty simple. They beat the Knights in week 1, in the playoffs week 1, beating them 3-0. Then they were able to beat the Hawks out 3-0. And then they beat out the Bulldogs to be able to finalize. And they demolished every single one of them, 3-0 in every single one of those games. This is going to be a tough one for the Panthers and Lynx. Meanwhile, the Lynx, who were started at the 3rd seed, so not the perfect seed, they were supposed to actually be make the playoffs, but barely make the playoffs. They are going to their first ever Ball Bowl. It's the first ever season, so it's the only time. Panthers have been to quite a lot of them. If you go back at the Panthers have been to a 17 different Ball Bowls. So this would be their 17th Ball Bowl here. As for Lynx, they have never been to the playoff. They haven't been to it, and all the records are not quite accurate. They'll be updated next week, so you'll be able to see it. That was for the last episode of Sports Hour. This is a very, very tough. As for the grades for the last season, if you looked at the Panthers got a B+, not getting about a 90 overall position percentage for that, and they weren't in a bad position. As for the Lynx, they were getting an F. They got an F in their draft. I don't know how they got an F. because they didn't get any sort of defensive backs at all. But they ended up making it to the playoffs, and that's pretty much all you can really hope for. And it's pretty impressive for that team. As for the season, if we look back at the season for the Panthers went 16-0, as we've already looked at that before. 16-0, and that's it. They went first in their offense and in their third in their defense. Offensively, they were first in the entire division for conference. 4 points overall, and that's ridiculous. That's ridiculously good for this position. As for the Lynx, not exactly in the best position here. They were fourth in offense, so pretty good in offense, but not so good in defense. So this is actually going to be a very tough game for them. As for the Panthers, if you looked at they were winning a lot of their games by quite a bit. Look at back here, Panthers on average got 115 points per game, which is a ridiculously high amount. Versus their last opponent only got 88 points, and it wasn't even close for any of those games. As for the Lynx, they got about 100, so not a terrible score. They weren't great in their minutes, and their last opponents. Looking at the playoffs here, their last opponent was the Bobcats, who were at much lower. So both of these teams beat out the teammates. But here's the difference. Here's the guideline for the Lynx going into this. The Lynx had to beat the Otters, which were supposed to win. By the way, that was 11-5, which were supposed to win. The Lynx were supposed to win 3-2 there. Then they were supposed to move on to the New England Cats, which the New England Cats were supposed to win. They lost. The New England Cats did lose that game, which means that the New England Cats would go to the where they were supposed to win in Game 5. They didn't go to Game 5. They went to Game 3 and won every one of them. If you look at the actual score line, 335 versus 208. Not even scoring 300 points. This is going to be a really tough game. In my position here, this is so tough to even try it. If we go back to the Panthers did play the Lynx. They only won by 4 points in the position before, and this was the first time they would ever played. But the Panthers did have some really, really blowout games. I will say the Legends game was pretty much a blowout, even though they were supposed to lose that game. It was also a blowout with the Knights in their last games. Their earlier games were blowouts, and their lowest games were blowouts as well. So this is a huge position. As for the Lynx, and I gotta make sure I have the right one here. Here we go. The Lynx are predicted to be 4-12 at the start of the season. They ended up 11-5. Their toughest games, they won. The Warriors game was probably one of the toughest games, which were only supposed to be 4-12 anyways. So, okay. But they beat some of the best teams. They beat the Dragons. They actually lost to the New England Cats, but that's okay. They were able to beat them in the playoffs. They're actually able to beat some of the best teams in the league. Even though they did lose a lot of games, they won a lot of games. They only lost a few games here going in it. They lost against the Otters both times, by the way, but they beat them in the playoffs, so that's okay. They lost to the New England Cats, which was kind of expected. They lost to the Otters, which was a 1-point game in overtime, so yeah. they lost against the Indians. Well, the Indians just had a really good game that week. They lost to the Panthers, no surprises there. But otherwise, they really had a really strong season. Even though the Lynx, didn't have the greatest defense, they were able to win games and do extremely well. They actually had the second best team in points scored. Not the best team scored overall, but yes. And there were a few other teams here because you got these two teams both were able to beat them out for that. The Lynx did win that position, and it's going to be a very tough game for them to go over here. Moving back, if you look at the team rosters starting in this year for the Panthers, they added someone. They added Charlotte Laville, I think was it? Charlotte Laville, and $8,000 a year for her, and she has actually done ridiculously well for her first year. I want to say this is probably one of the best picks offense. Now they actually got her like week 4, so it wasn't actually a huge thing on it. As for the Lynx, they actually had what we thought was probably going to be one of the weaker positions. If you look back down at the Lynx only had 6 players. And actually that's not completely true. They actually did get 2 defensive players signed off of the. I did not update that. They wanted to keep it kind of quiet. They did get 2 defensive backs. They did sign 2 defensive backs at this last year. 3 of them. So they signed, according to what it says, these 3 were all signed. All of them were defensive backs. Fix this. All of them were DBs. And another thing, they were only paid $4,000 a year because of the context of no one knew what they were going to do. But they were rated in a pretty high position. They're all rookies as well, so they had a really new team. But being a 92 overall team is a pretty huge thing. So this is going to be a huge thing for that. I don't know why we didn't put that in there before. They want to keep it quiet, yeah. So that's going to be the best things. Now I do want to look at a few of the games going into this season here. And we're going to talk about in week 16. Week 16, where the Lynx were basically on the position to win the division if they won. If they didn't win, yes, they beat the Bears. Actually demolished the Bears, by the way, in that position due to the fact. If we were back to week 4, the Lynx were really good as well. They did lose, but they did do really well in that regard. I actually predicted them wrong off of that. And then finally, if we looked back, like one other week, week 11, Week 11, which was a week that kind of changed things. They won against the Dragons, beating the Dragons by a pretty good margin. And those were basically the weeks that really mattered. As for the Panthers in those weeks, they absolutely demolished the Cardinals. In week 4, Panthers demolished it. And it looked at week 16, which was last week, Panthers demolished them. So the thing is, each of the weeks we looked at for those hits, the Panthers have demolished them. So it's not going to be a very fun game for them to go for. I want to say the Lynx are going to be the team that is going to be surprising in Lynx. I do think the Lynx are going to have some win off of this. But unfortunately, I do not see them winning it in the end. In my prediction here, it's going to be a very good. I'm predicting it's going to go 1-0 to the Panthers off for game 1. Now, game 2 will be a back and forth game, and then it will be the Lynx that will get on top. Then in game 3, it will be the Panthers again taking it. They are playing at home in game 2 and 3. I feel they're going to win in game 1, and they're going to be able to win one of the games at home and then play it. Then it's going to come down to game 4. In game 4, I feel as if the Panthers won't be able to win that one playing away at that stadium. Panthers generally play at Bank of America Stadium normally anyways. But it's different for the Ball Bowl this year. Normally the Ball Bowl is placed at Bank of America Stadium every day. It's different now. It's going back and forth because of the 5 points. I will say at the end, I do think the Panthers will win in the 5th game, playing at NBL Stadium. I think they'll be able to work onto this, and I think it's going to be a very, very interesting game for those teams. It's going to be tough because looking at some of the teams that they've beat, the Lynx, who won all 3 of their games against it, won three games before winning in the end. They played the Otters early in the season. They won the first 2 games, but they were really, really close games, and that's why I have to look up for those things. They did lose by 1, but look at all of these games. All of the first 3 games were really close. And by the way, all those games went into overtime. The Lynx 3rd game went into 3rd overtime before the Lynx lost that game. Guess they were just tired in that report. They were able to win in this one, and the Lynx won that one without any problems. Moving to the 2nd week, when they played against the Leland Cats, it was supposed to be the Leland Cats to lose. The Lynx were supposed to lose this game. The Leland Cats were supposed to win. And as you notice, the first game was really close. The second game was still pretty close. Third game was really close. But the Lynx were able to win all of those games. And none of those games went to overtime. And then we had the next one, which was the Lynx and Bobcats game. None of the games went into overtime either, and just came down to the fact that they were the better team in that regard. So this is going to be a very tough match for them. I will say this. Let's go back to the Panthers. Panthers are the team that I feel is going to either win this game really quickly, eat their games really quickly, they're going to get so far ahead, or they're going to be behind. They're going to start like a little behind. I do see I think it's going to be very, very close. But looking at the Panthers, they were way ahead of the Knights. Knights were just not really that good of a team, though. If you look at the back of the Knights were 88 points. course, the Legends were not good either. So if you look at the playoffs for that, the Knights were terrible. The Legends were terrible as well. No, surprisingly, they kept it up, but that's also because the Foxes weren't great as well. So it was a pretty one-sided game. Now, looking at the offensive rating, the Legends were just terrible. The the Foxes had at least a little bit of a leeway for that. But looking now at the the air game they had, Panthers had a ridiculously easy schedule going into this. They had the Knights, that was super easy. The Hawks was a tough game. And that should have been a game that should have been a watch. I feel like it should have been a 3-2. I feel like the Panthers should have won game 1, then lost again, then won the final 2 games. I feel that's how it should have gone. It's not how it went at the end. I feel like the Panthers did show that they have what it takes. They were scoring, by the way, more points than they scored almost every one of their games. In every playoff game, they averaged 115. They scored in their games against the Knights 118 points, 119 really. Then when they played against the Hawks, they scored 124. When they played against the Ents, it wasn't nearly as good, but they still had 108. As for the Lynx, their score line, other than the game going to overtime, 103 points is still very good. The second game they had about 116 points, so yeesh, they had a lot more there. And then for the final game for the Lynx, they had 111. So they were actually scoring about the average. So in my predictions, this is going to be the toughest game that I say that you have ever going to see. Tough games. This is going to be very tough. I feel like the Panthers will win the first game. Win all the games that they will have at home. So I think they'll win the game 2 and they will win game 3. But I do think they're going to lose game 1. I do think they're going to lose game 1. I feel they're going to lose game 4. But I think they're going to win in the end in game 5. And that's predictions for this week. We'll figure out what's going on with that, because I think this is going to be a very tough week for the Legends and the New England Cats, the Panthers and New England Cats. In my predictions, this is going to be one of the toughest games we will have seen, one of the toughest ball bowls ever. That is all for Sports Hour. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to keep your game on. And we'll have one more Sports Hour episode. I'll have the final explanation of what's going to happen for Sports Hour next season. I'll see you guys then. Okay. Until then, have a good night. All right, and we'll see who wins the Ball Bowl.